Welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now let's start with the first story. It's called Changing Process. I work in tech support, essentially in a call center where we solve computer problems. When someone calls, we document everything: name, the issue, and the solution provided. During a team meeting, one of my higher-ups, let's call her Paula, announced a new policy. If a client calls back about the same issue shortly after, the person who ultimately fixes the problem gets full credit. I'm not here to be a star employee. I just put in my 8 hours, do my job, and collect my paycheck. That's it. One day, a client called in and mentioned they'd just spoken to another team member, let's call him John, who had told them to call back. I checked, and sure enough, John had just gone to lunch. I asked if they wanted me to transfer them to his voicemail, but they said, "Can you just help me instead?" No problem. I was familiar with the issue and resolved it in about 20 minutes. Following procedure, I updated the record, put my name as the agent who fixed the issue, and added John's name as a footnote for partial credit, which wasn't required but seemed fair. Fast forward, John gets back from lunch and immediately approaches me. Without so much as a greeting, he demands to know why I took his name off the record. He tells me he spent an hour on the phone with the client and that I should have let him know if I was going to touch his records. Mind you, John and I rarely talk. He's not exactly warm or friendly toward me. Today he skipped any pleasantries and went straight to confronting me. I calmly explained that the client didn't want to wait and that I followed procedure by fixing the issue and noting his name for partial credit. After hearing this, John mumbled something about not seeing the footnote and walked away with a half-hearted thanks. No apology, just that. In our next team meeting, our boss announced a clarification. Going forward, whoever speaks to the client first gets full credit, no matter what. I asked for confirmation, pointing out that Paula had said otherwise. But the boss reaffirmed the change and quickly moved on. I had my suspicions about where this policy update came from, but I let it go. Now, some background on John. His strategy is to rush through calls to boost his calls taken metrics. My approach is more thorough. I focus on fully resolving the client's issue before ending the call. A few weeks went by, and this new policy had some unexpected consequences for John. When clients called back about unresolved issues he'd marked as fixed, I followed the new rule by restarting the record and only adding my footnote. This meant the record returned to John's workflow, requiring him to review it before marking it fixed again. Since John didn't read footnotes carefully, he frequently had to reach out to me for updates. Here's where it got interesting. Because I'd already documented everything in my notes, I didn't rush to respond. If a problem required confirmation from the client, John had to make that follow-up call himself. Suddenly, he went from talking to me once every few months to needing my input weekly. Essentially, he was now doing double or triple the work, all because he wanted full credit for incomplete fixes. It turns out, rushing through calls for better metrics wasn't the best long-term strategy. The next story is called End of Shift. I work overnights at a well-known gym franchise. My typical shift runs from 10 PM to 6 AM, and there's supposed to be 2 people working the night shift together. Lately though, my coworkers have been calling off frequently, leaving me to work alone all night. My coworker, let's call her Sam, is scheduled to come in at 6 AM to take over when my shift ends. The issue is, Sam is almost never on time. She's usually 10 to 15 minutes late. Now, here's where things get tricky. Since Sam doesn't show up on time, I often have to stay clocked in past 6 AM to make sure the gym isn't left unattended. Because I'm working alone during the night, I can't complete important tasks until she arrives. My boss noticed that I was clocking out late and got upset with me for not leaving exactly at 6 AM. He gave me a stern lecture, which left me feeling pretty disheartened, especially since the situation wasn't my fault. So I told him, okay, I'll leave exactly at 6 AM. And that's exactly what I started doing. Now when my shift ends, I clock out and leave, even if no one has arrived to take over. This has resulted in the gym being unattended, until someone else eventually shows up, sometimes a while later. Naturally, this has caused confusion among members. My manager is scrambling to figure out what to do. He clearly expected me to clock out, but stay off the clock until someone arrived. But why would I do that? I'm not going to take the fall for someone else consistently being late, especially when it's not part of my job description. Interestingly, my manager hasn't written me up or fired me, because technically I'm doing exactly what he instructed. The third story is called Neighborhood Enforcer. A couple of months ago, I had a run-in with the self-appointed neighborhood enforcer. Let's call her Linda. I don't live in an HOA community, but Linda likes to act as if we do. She's the type of person who leaves passive-aggressive notes on cars, knocks on doors to complain about lawn heights, and frequently calls the city about violations that don't actually exist. The issue started because I parked my car on the street in front of my house. It's perfectly legal, and I've been doing it for years without any problems. Apparently though, Linda decided my car was an eyesore. One day, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper that said, "This is not a parking lot. Park in your driveway like a respectful neighbor. Don't make me involve the city." I was annoyed, but decided to shrug it off and kept parking where I always do. That wasn't enough for Linda. The next time she confronted me in person. "I've told you before, parking on the street is inconsiderate. You have a driveway, use it. It's legal to park here, and I'm not blocking anything. It doesn't matter. It's ugly and makes the neighborhood look bad. Park in your driveway, or I'll report you." That's when I decided, fine, if she wants me to park in my driveway, I'll do exactly that. But I'll follow every rule to the letter. Here's the thing, my driveway is small. If I park my car in it, it blocks the sidewalk. Technically, city ordinances prohibit obstructing the sidewalk. So the next day, I pulled my car right into the driveway, perfectly centered. And yes, it completely blocked the sidewalk. Linda noticed almost immediately. She marched up to my door, clearly upset. "You can't block the sidewalk. That's illegal." "Oh, I thought you wanted me to park in my driveway." "Not like that. Park properly. There's no way to park in my driveway without blocking the sidewalk. Guess I'll have to park back on the street then." Her reaction was priceless. She sputtered for a moment before stomping off. Thinking this was the end of it, I went back to parking on the street. But Linda wasn't done. She actually called the city on me. About a week later, a city inspector came by. He checked everything out, saw that my car was legally parked, and told me I wasn't breaking any rules. He even mentioned that Linda had been making frequent complaints about supposed violations in the neighborhood, and that they were starting to lose patience with her. I thought that would be the end of it. Until last week, Linda started parking her car on the street, in front of my house. So I did what any good neighbor would do. I called the city. Turns out her car was parked a little too close to a fire hydrant. She got a ticket. The next story is called New Rules. This goes back to my days working at a large public transit authority. Safety was a top priority, especially when it came to moving buses. This was particularly true in the depot and outside parking lots. With 250 buses to manage, moving these large vehicles in tight spaces was no small task, and it could be risky for buses, infrastructure, and people. The layout of our outside lot required about 50 buses to be backed in. They were parked in 2 rows of 25, nose to tail. For safety, the rules required that when backing up a bus, there must always be a backup helper present. The reason is pretty clear. Backing up 15-ton vehicles into other 15-ton vehicles can be disastrous, especially at night or in bad weather. However, management decided they didn't want to pay for someone to assist with backing the buses. Here's where it gets interesting. There were 6 of us shifters, operators tasked with moving buses in the yard. Rules stated that you should never leave a bus unattended. If a bus was running, someone had to be in the driver's seat at all times. On the first night without the backup helper, the first bus arrived at the outside lot and called the yard dispatcher for assistance. The dispatcher ignored the request. The second bus did the same thing, with the same result. By the time the 6th bus was in the yard, all 6 shifters were stuck waiting for backup help. Meanwhile, the line of buses waiting to pull into the depot stretched around the block. With nowhere to go, traffic became an issue. The neighborhood, already frustrated with the depot, started calling the police to report the buses blocking the streets. The yard dispatcher was overwhelmed, trying to manage the chaos. It didn't take long for management to realize the mistake. Within an hour, the backup helper was back on the job. Interestingly enough, the helper was now working overtime for the next 3 months, as management had officially eliminated the position beforehand. That job typically went to an operator on restricted duty, but when management wrote the rules, it wasn't up to us to ignore them. The last story is called Fire Drill. My great-uncle worked for over 50 years at the same confectionery factory, most of the time as a boiler room attendant. This was in the 50s, and at the time, most of the machines and processes were powered by steam, even the heating. The steam was generated by massive boilers, and it was his job to monitor them to ensure everything ran smoothly. These boilers were powerful, and if mishandled, could potentially explode, causing significant damage. By law, the boilers had to be attended at all times, with shifts scheduled around the clock, even when the factory was closed. The reason was that it took so long to heat them up that it was easier and more cost-effective to keep them running overnight. After about 10 years without any incidents, the company hired a new leading hand, who also acted as the safety officer. He had served as a sergeant in the army and took his role very seriously, instituting a variety of new procedures. Some were warranted, but others seemed more about asserting authority. When he announced the factory's first fire drill, he instructed all staff to evacuate the building in an orderly fashion when they heard the alarm. When he got to the boiler room, where my great-uncle was on duty, he informed him that he, too, would need to evacuate during the drill. My great-uncle tried to explain that the boiler couldn't be left unattended, but the safety officer didn't give him a chance to explain. He firmly insisted that everyone, without exception, must treat the drill as if it were a real fire. So when the fire bell rang, my uncle followed instructions to the letter. He turned off the gas to the boilers, vented all the built-up steam, purged the water, and joined everyone at the evacuation point. While doing the head count, the production manager spotted my uncle and immediately approached him, concerned. "What are you doing away from the boiler?" My uncle calmly replied that he was participating in the fire drill as instructed, but reassured him that he had shut the boiler down completely beforehand. The production manager's face turned pale. He asked how long it would take to bring the boilers back online. My uncle explained that it would take hours just to refill the boilers with water and heat them up again. Worse, because of the emergency purge, every pipe, joint and connection had to be inspected for damage before restarting the system to ensure it was safe. The other boiler attendants were called in and paid double time to work through the night to prepare the boilers for the next day. Meanwhile, the production staff were sent home, but still received their full day's pay. Since it wasn't their fault, the factory couldn't operate. The company also lost an entire day of production. The safety officer kept his job, but the incident left a lasting impression. For the next 40 years, the boiler staff were officially exempt from participating in fire drills. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.